so unbelievably terrifying compared to everything you saw so far in this ride. And they say that when it opened, kids were so afraid they had to modify the ride. So the Dragon Room was divided into 2 tunnels, so you had the option to bypass it. These carts each seated 4 people, 2 in the front seat and 2 in the back, and whoever was in like the driver's seat had a lever on the front. So the elf voice would instruct you to pull the lever to the left if you were brave enough, or if you were too afraid, you would push it to the right. So the track would shift and it would take you past the dragon area and eventually back uphill to the exit. So if any of you happen to remember this ride, you must be remembering something else because this is fiction. Yeah, we are in the pitch right now. This ride is just something I made up, but it sounds like something that could have been a real ride, right? And that's the whole point. I hope that it carries with it something familiar. The main character in my film, we'll call him Dante, he went on this ride as a kid, but he hasn't thought about it in a long time. Now he's 40-something, he's a truck driver and is always driving across the country, doesn't really have a common place to call home, and he's been very content with it, but he increasingly starts to miss having roots in someplace familiar. His only connection with his past, his only anchor is his mom, who's very old and sick. He takes some time off to take care of her, but honestly, she seems like she's ready to go. But he's not. He can't let go. He'll pick up certain things in the house, like photos, and say, remember this, remember that. And his mom doesn't really seem to care. She's real cranky. He brings her some soup and says, it's healthy, you should have some. And she says, it's so healthy, why don't you give it to your kids? Oh, that's right, you don't have any. That's her way of saying, move on with your life. You need to go to your next chapter. But he's so stuck in the past. And that was his last interaction with her, because later that night, she died in her sleep. And well, that was pretty hard for him, obviously, but on top of the natural grieving, he's also bothered by the fact that he just has no real connection with his past anymore. So while he's cleaning out her house, he finds all these boxes in the attic. He's digging through, and what does he find? A Polaroid photograph. It's him and 3 of his friends, all young teens, sitting in a minecart, just having exited the ride. Because after you got out, they'd snap a photo. Sometimes a photo exists as proof. It can bring back an old memory or confirm that the event you remember really happened. But also your mind often fills in all the other details and may embellish it. So Dante remembers this amusement park with his friends as the best time of his life. And true or not, his memory, it's all he has. So he tries to research the ride, but unfortunately it hasn't been well documented. There seems to exist more information in his own memory than there does on the internet. But he's pretty sure he identified it as the Gnome Cave of Pinewood Park. The memory that sticks with him the most was that he didn't see the dragon. He was in the commander's seat and all his friends were egging him on, and he wanted to show them that he's brave. He gripped that lever, switching it from the right to the left, but in front of him he saw the cart of kids disappear into the fog with strobing lights and a loud roar, and he could hear the kids screaming, not like a roller coaster, no. This was different. This was like they were screaming for their lives. So he gripped that lever, and at the very last possible second, he switched it back to the right. They never saw the dragon. And though he was relieved, he was disappointed in himself for chickening out, and he never forgot it. So now, in his 40s, he decides he must reunite with his old friends. So he reaches out to them. It's kind of out of the blue and a little awkward. They give him sympathy for his mom passing away, and they all agree to meet up. They get together at a diner or something. I can't remember the last time I was at a diner. I don't know if COVID plays a part in this story yet. It was written before that, so I don't know if they're all masked up or what. But anyway, his friends have all aged. Everybody looks so much different. It's a little hard to even recognize each other. They talk about old times, and the memories start to come back. He shows them the Polaroid, the photo of them all coming out of the Gnome Cave. And they all get a laugh, jogs their memory, although each seem to remember the details a little differently, but the main things line up. Of the three of them, Kate is trying to get a job, but she has this burglary attempt on her record from when she was young. Even though she did her time and it was decades ago, it's still been holding her back from getting the jobs and or promotions she's been motivated to get. So she's like the opposite of Dante. She doesn't want to go back to her past. She's running from her past, doesn't want to have anything to do with it, wants a clean reset and to move on. So Kate and Dante will be tested as this story goes on. Bruce is more of an ex-party man. Now he works an office job, is a family man, but there's this reckless side to him that's been sleeping for decades and just waiting to wake back up again, to relive the fun days. Yeah, bro. Adam is a man of many phobias and anxiety. He's closed the doors on career choices that's kept him from living his life to the fullest. So he might finally welcome the chance to do something different and wild. Dante has a request to revisit the park. Everybody pauses. Of course, the park's no longer open. It closed sometime in the early 90s, but he just wants to revisit the spot. So they have mixed opinions. He tells them it's only 4 miles from the diner, so they're close anyway. And with his mom passing away, it would mean the world to him if they'd indulge him and go back there one last time. So they drive on over, and there it is. The big sign with its steel frame corroding says Pinewood Park, though half the letters are missing or leaning over. But it's amazing. It's still there. So they take some selfies, and then Dante wants a closer look, so he walks in almost by a hypnotic trance through tall grass, stepping over fallen barricades, long unattended. The rest of the group almost has no choice but to follow him in, and here they see the roller coaster. The wooden bones collapsed like an eel skeleton, growing moss, the merry-go-round, its bolts eroding and imprisoned by vegetation, the concession stand, its paint peeling off and decomposing, the Ferris wheel eaten away by rust, exposing iron and steel. You can almost hear the sounds of children laughing and screaming, the roller coaster whizzing by. Dante visualizes his childhood self running by, literally visualizing him right there, his young self, and he's sort of like this creepy 40-year-old bystander just standing there staring at this kid who was once him. So just as he and his friends got older, so did the park. But what about the gnome cave? While his friends are pretty sure it's long gone, he insists to find it. They aren't able to locate anything that resembles a mountain, but there is a cheap castle made out of wood, sort of like a storybook version of a castle, kind of ripping off the Disney castle. It's about 15 feet tall, has a tower in the center, choked by vines, the paint's peeling off, graffiti scribbled all over. Dante stands there and he tells them his hypothesis, that this castle was mounted on the very spot where Gnome Cave was. They all seem skeptical and kind of sad to see their friends so hopelessly clinging to this idea. But he tells them the wooden walls of this castle was built around the Gnome Cave as merely a decorative way to seal up the entrance after that ride closed. He stands back and points out how the tower is sort of off-center and kind of gives the overall composition this lopsided look, which was the same shape as the mountain as he remembers. Or he could be thinking of that leaning cliff of Vasquez Rocks, the Star Trek cliff, which he says the ride was modeled after. And as he goes on explaining this, everybody's eyes all meet on that shape, and they see it together. That's right. This used to be Gnome Cave. And Dante adds that this would mean the ride still exists beneath our feet. No way. But yes. Do you think this cheap little park would have the funds to gut the whole ride? Wouldn't it be easier to leave it all there and just seal the entrance? Yeah, it's all down there. So, without further hesitation, Dante takes a crowbar out of his backpack, and everybody's like, what? Like he's been planning this the whole time? He starts stripping the wood off, and Kate's ready to leave. Like, I can't be around this shit. but nobody can resist to be there to witness the revelation. Seeing those boards come off, and there, lo and behold, is a cave-like opening and two rickety old tracks on the ground. Two tunnels, an entrance and exit, both disappearing in the darkness. And hanging above, there it is, the wooden sign, Gnome Cave. Boom. Confirmed. The mission is complete. Dante rejoices, takes out some flashlights and hands them all to his friends. They all look at him like he's crazy. Except Bruce, he's fascinated. This is an adventure. Kate and Adam start to walk away, but Dante, he pleads with them. Do you remember the vow? Everyone stops. What vow? The dragon. Everyone looks at each other. We never got to see the dragon. Dante takes blame. He says, it was my fault for chickening out. But after that, we made a vow that one day we would come back here and see the dragon. This is our chance to finish the ride. I mean, you can't go on a ride without finishing it, you know? Life took a big detour. Now, this is time to get closure. He makes his pitch and, well, they all agree. You know, fine, let's go in real quick and take a look. So they walk in there, and sure enough, they find all the gnomes, the elves, it's all there. And if any of those things were at all creepy in the first place, now they're beyond creepy. I mean, they're frozen in different states of movement. They're covered in dust and cobwebs. One of their jaws is missing. Another's head has completely fallen off. Some rotted from the inside. Their eyes disappeared, leaving only a crumbling shell of a face. Moisture seeps into their plastic skins, oxidizing and cracking the faces of a lost civilization. They look almost alive, like they've been waiting all these decades. Welcome back. Remember us? We're still waving. We're still here. Great. Okay. Dante wants to push on. The rest of the gang is conflicted. You know, maybe we should leave. And just then, the tunnel behind them collapses. Cement, lumber come raining down. Everyone hops out of the way. Big cloud of dust comes in. And once the rumble settles and the dust clears, they can see nothing but giant wooden beams and cinder blocks filling the tunnel. The way back is completely blocked. And since the entrance and exit are ultimately the same portal, that leaves them with no way out. And as they stand there, terrified and panicked, Dante says, well, we can still see the dragon, and everyone gives him a look. And that is Act 1. I'm going to stop there so I don't spoil anything. But as you can tell, this is where it turns into a horror film. How are they going to get out of there? This trip down memory lane may turn into trip down memory lane. Will your memories die with you, or will you die with your memories? Yeah, those are some possible taglines and titles if I want to go cheesy with it. I don't know yet. It might just be called Gnome Cave or Pinewood Park or something like that. But anyway, it's got a little bit of The Shining and The Descent. Has a lot of common horror tropes, but it leans heavily on the nostalgia factor. There's lots of horror films that take place in abandoned amusement parks or active amusement parks like Tobe Hooper's Funhouse, for example. But usually it's a scary ride. What I'm depicting is a ride that was never intended to be that scary. It was an innocent children's ride, but it unintentionally took on a creepy aspect. You know the Disney ride, It's a Small World, very famous. Just a bunch of cute animatronic characters singing and dancing. But imagine if you were alone in that ride and shut off the lights. It would be totally different. You may know already that I have a fascination with inanimate objects being scary, but in this particular film, the more disturbing aspect lies in the fact that all your memories are going to be gone one day. The places you remember will be gone, if they aren't already, and you will be gone. And then what's left? Nothing. It's as if it never happened. Horror films are meant to put you face to face with something disturbing, and, well, I find that idea disturbing, so there you go. My plans for this film are completely up in the air. There's many possibilities. The film could get made, or the film could not get made, or the film could get made in some scaled down or different way. I've already rewritten it several times, and that's what happens. Movies go through changes. Or it could become a book or a graphic novel or some other medium. Or I might make a different film with a similar idea. I've already started writing another one designed to be something I could shoot entirely in one room and with the minimum resources. So this one's a possibility if the other one doesn't work out. But no matter what happens, I'm glad I at least got a chance to tell you part of the story. I hope that it entertained you, and thanks for listening. It was 35 years ago at the dawn of the slasher movie genre when the date of Friday the 13th became synonymous with Jason Voorhees. When it comes to 80s slasher films, the Friday the 13th series is the standard. Somehow these movies managed to get made every year all through the 80s, except 83 and 87. You couldn't stop them. They were as consistent and familiar as AC/DC albums. You always knew what you were going to get.
These Friday the 13th guys, they've made the same movie 9 times. That takes talent.
It's one of the few strings of sequels where the main recurring character who you cheer for is a masked killer. Because these movies are so absurd and make-believe, we take some kind of sick enjoyment out of seeing Jason slaughter everybody for no good reason. Jason is as appealing as Godzilla in the sense that he's an unstoppable machine who takes a lot of abuse and keeps on going. He doesn't give a fuck about anything. More of the appeal comes from how trashy these movies are. These are prime examples of cinematic exploitation gone amok, juggling violence and sex with shameless dark humor throughout. Watching these is a guilty pleasure. But who am I kidding? These movies are fucking awesome. They have a strong fan base, which I think was helped fueled because they never got any respect from the critics and the rest of the film industry. When somebody tells you you're not supposed to watch something and it's terrible, that makes people want to see them even more. Just like the characters in the movies who are always doing things they're not supposed to. I like to think of these as summer movies. They have a social atmosphere with a bunch of characters always on vacation who are just trying to get away from the rest of the world and don't have any care. They're the kind of movies best watched with a group of friends or alone in the dark late at night. They also helped independent filmmakers get into making slasher movies because they're relatively easy to start out with. They don't require much clever writing, they're built on cliches, and they can be shot all in the woods without a lot of money. The first Friday the 13th was shot only on an estimated $550,000. Even as a kid, I knew of Jason Voorhees, even though I was too young to see any of the movies. They were forbidden and unspeakable, but still I went out trick-or-treating as Jason. He was that much of an icon where everybody knew Jason, even without having any knowledge of the films themselves. I played the NES games, so that front cover was the only image I ever saw from the films, my only glimpse into an adult world. In my teenage years, after I got into horror movies, I first saw the Friday the 13th films on TNT's Monster Vision. For more info on that, you should check out my video all about Monster Vision. This was when Joe Bob Briggs hosted an all-night marathon of parts 1 through 6. This put me in the right kind of mood because these movies work good as late-night kind of movies. Then in 2006, when I was working on my Angry Nerd review of the video game, I watched the entire series on DVD for my first time. In the years since, I've highlighted Friday the 13th in my Monster Madness History of Horror. I recorded an interview of myself for the documentary His Name Was Jason. The nerd video was included in the extras. I also made a top 13 video listing my favorite moments from the series. So Friday the 13th has always been well represented on Cinemassacre. But the only thing left to do is review the individual movies one at a time, which has probably been my biggest request for Monster Madness every year. It'll be hard to do because all the parts that are most worthy to talk about I already mentioned in my top 13 video. I remember the series best for select moments, and I had to cover the Halloween series first because Halloween started the whole slasher craze. And of course I had to do all the great horror franchises from the Golden Age and Silver Age. Slashers would be the Bronze Age. Well, since there's 3 Friday the 13th this year on the calendar, I guess there's no escaping it. Let's look at each of these movies one at a time and see how well they hold up. The first thing I had to do was watch all the movies again to get them fresh in my mind. Now that they're all out on Blu-ray, it couldn't have been more perfect. I love when they get entire film franchises out on a single Blu-ray set. This is a really great package with booklets and a ton of bonus features. It was also very nice to see the Halloween series get the same Blu-ray treatment, where previously the DVD rights were owned by so many different companies that you had no choice but to buy them all separately. So here's what I'll be doing. I'll be reviewing Friday the 13th parts 1 through 5 leading up to this Friday, Friday the 13th. Then give me some time to finish the rest, and I'll post parts 6 through 10 ending on Friday the 13th in March. That means the last one will be Jason X. I've already reviewed Freddy vs. Jason and the 2009 version before. Hopefully I don't go too crazy like Joe Bob did. Let's begin. The first Friday the 13th was directed by Sean Cunningham. It takes place at Camp Crystal Lake, which was filmed on a real campground in New Jersey. The actual name of the campground in real life is Nobi Bosco, which is a private property. It's strange that the movie Halloween, even though it was shot in California, was set in the fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois, which was inspired by Haddonfield, New Jersey. My friends and I used to ride the school bus through that town, and we would always joke to look out for Michael Myers without knowing that the setting of the movie was actually inspired by that town because the producer and co-writer Deborah Hill grew up there. I don't mean to get off topic, but the point is, both Friday the 13th and Halloween came from New Jersey. I guess it's just a slasher kind of state. Speaking of Halloween, it has to be said that Friday the 13th would have never existed without it. And of course there were movies before Halloween like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Twitch of the Death Nerve, and Black Christmas, but the familiar slasher format with all its cliches first took complete full shape with Halloween. Halloween basically started the whole thing, or made it popular, but here's what Friday the 13th did differently. It put the setting in a campground. The idea of being out in the woods where the killer could be hiding behind any tree became a cliche in its own right. In Halloween, the horror comes to a neighborhood, but in Friday the 13th, the characters are in the woods, out of their home element. Instead of the horror coming to them, they go to the horror. From the beginning, they make it clear that Camp Crystal Lake is a bad place to go.
This place is cursed.
It's the horror tradition that goes all the way back to Jonathan Harker traveling to Castle Dracula.
You mustn't go there.
A camp counselor on her way over is told the story of how a young boy named Jason Voorhees drowned in the lake and a bunch of murders happened afterwards. Because of that, the camp was closed down for many years, but now it's reopened and the same kind of murders continue. The characters all act with no care in the world. What the fuck? He could have killed her! The movie does a fairly good job at building an ominous mood. We can feel that something bad is going to happen. And when it does, there are some gory highlights, like when Kevin Bacon gets an arrow through the neck, number 12 in my top 13 Friday moments. The special effects were done by Tom Savini, who was fresh off from doing Dawn of the Dead. Unfortunately, lots of the gory bits were cut short because of the MPAA saying that they would give it an X rating otherwise. It's a shame because Tom Savini really did a good job. Just listen to Joe Bob.
And all Tom's best work is exactly what they cut out. It's like the better job he does, the more they want to cut it because it looks too real.
If there's any movie that Friday the 13th ripped off, I think it's mostly Psycho for the music because it sounds just like it. So what about all the non-highlights, the moments nobody cares to talk about? And there's plenty of them. How about the scene where she makes coffee? They show the entire process. It's true that sometimes in order to make the scary scenes have a stronger effect, you need to have the calm moments, but there's way too much of it. The movie is very slow for the most part, but in the last 15 minutes it picks up. Spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen it. If you want to be surprised by the ending, stop the video here. Okay, so this is when the last survivor, Alice, meets Mrs. Voorhees, who at first seems to be real friendly, but then she reveals that she's the mother of the boy, Jason, who drowned in the lake. She's the one who murdered everybody for the death of her boy, and even though she's crazy, she at least has a motive that makes her character believable. I mean, still, none of these camp counselors are any of the ones responsible. And then she starts talking in Jason's voice, which is real disturbing.
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her.
It's just like the split personality that Norman Bates has in Psycho, but in that movie, it's the son speaking in the mother's voice. So basically, Friday the 13th is like Psycho reversed. Mrs. Voorhees, played by Betsy Palmer, is the best part of the film. She's terrifying because in one instance, she's nice, and then she flips out. It's kind of funny that after all the elaborate kills she's been doing, she resorts to slapping. I wonder what the movie would have been like if Mrs. Voorhees was a main character instead of introducing her in the last 15 minutes. Had she been there all along, interacting with the camp counselors and being friendly, it would have come as more a surprise when she snaps. It also must be a big surprise for any first-time viewers who imagine that Jason would be the killer. So then Alice decapitates Mrs. Voorhees. She gets on a canoe, the morning light comes, she's safe, and everything's fine. Number one moment in my top 13 Friday moments. When I first saw this, it made my heart jump into my throat. I was finally convinced that Jason is not in this movie, and after all, nothing supernatural happens up until this point. The whole film is grounded in reality. After an hour-and-a-half runtime, you think Jason is really dead in this movie, but then this creepy zombie kid jumps up out of nowhere. Even to this day, rewatching the scene and knowing it's coming, I find it very unsettling. Even the music, which is deceivingly peaceful, I find to be deeply disturbing. I think there's only a handful of horror movie scenes that prey so effectively on your senses. But then, she wakes up.
Boy, Jason.
Jason?
Why did they piss away the ending like this? It should have ended right when Jason pulled her into the water. Right there, when the camera dips down to the water, that was the perfect opportunity. Fade to black, end it right there, and leave us with that uncomfortable feeling. It would have been perfect, but they blew it. To sum things up, the whole final act with Mrs. Voorhees and Jason is excellent, and there are some good moments earlier, but there's so much filler throughout that I can't really call this a major classic. Even though it started a whole franchise and its sequels outnumber Halloween, I don't think it holds up as well today as Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre do. After all, it doesn't even have the hockey mask Jason that we all know and love. The movie isn't so important for what it is, but for what it started. Following the success of the first Friday the 13th movie, the sequel was rushed into production and released the following year. It was shot in Connecticut this time instead of New Jersey.
I think they ought to stick with their roots. Jason is a Jersey guy, you know what I mean?
It's a true sequel in a sense that it feels just like a continuation of the first movie, for better and for worse. The same sort of things happen all over again. The tone just feels like the first movie. It moves along at a very slow pace. The production quality is a little better. Supposedly the budget was a little over $1 million, whereas the first one was just over $500,000. The plot is nothing out of the ordinary. A new group of people arrive at the campground and are all killed off. The characters are all new because there's nobody left alive from the first movie, except Alice, and guess what? She gets killed before the opening credits, in her own home. Of course, I'm sure everybody knows by now, Jason Voorhees is the killer in this movie, and from now on. It makes sense to me that Jason would kill her because she decapitated his mother. What doesn't make sense is why he goes around killing everybody else too, but who cares? Maybe it's just a territorial thing. The campground is like his home. Anyway, with Alice out of the way, there's no more recurring characters. Well, scratch that. There's the You're Doomed guy, but even he meets his demise. It should be said that unlike the Halloween series, there's no Laurie Strode or Dr. Loomis equivalent. No recurring characters to get to know or relate to. I think that's something that's missing that could have made these films better. What I do like is the backstory of Jason, how he drowned in the lake. It gives it more of an urban legend kind of feel. The body was never found, so nobody even knows if Jason was real or not. The campfire scene alone sets the perfect mood. There's an early example of the prankster stereotype, the guy who puts on a mask and scares people before the real killer shows up. It's a big cliche, soon to be repeated in the sequels and countless other films. Of course, there's also the car won't start cliche. There's the girl with the ass that gets its own close-up. Then the pervert guy comes out of the woods and slingshots her. And he's not even the slightest bit coy about it. He stares her right down with that sneaky grin. Number 8 in my top 13 moments. Later on, she's swimming naked and he takes her clothes away. Fucking pervert. One big cliche that gets used way too often here is the infamous POV shot. Half the movie is just people running from the camera. Then there's the dead dog. Don't kill the dog. Nobody likes that. Kill the people instead.
One of the main rules of horror films is that you can kill as many people as you want to, but you never kill a pet. People get upset.
By the way, to everyone who says that Jason never runs, look at that. What do you call that? A fast walk? After the hour mark, the movie picks up. Like always, it's the final chase scene that makes it worthwhile, although it's nowhere near as good as the finale from the first movie. And it's a little, what's the word? Slapsticky. Yeah, I mean, anytime the scary villain is kicked in the balls, what can you say? Some of the chase takes place in Jason's makeshift home, which he built in the woods using parts of different things. It's a nice addition, and it should be said that the way Jason is portrayed in this movie is more like a realistic hermit instead of a supernatural killing machine. The fact that he keeps his mother's head on display is an effectively eerie touch. I wonder how Jason got his mother's sweater but not her body. Maybe they thought it would be too much like Psycho, or she had more than one of the same sweater. I've always wondered what the series would have been like if Mrs. Voorhees came back more often in some shape or form.
Jason, Mother is talking to you!
From here on out, the whole focus became on Jason. Of course, as you can see, Jason's wearing a sack over his head instead of the famous hockey mask, which doesn't happen until part 3. So we're 2 movies in, and it's still not the Jason that everybody knows. This makes the series a little more interesting to me than the Halloween series because everything that you want to see gets introduced gradually, so it savors the experience when watching all these movies in order. There's been a lot of confusion on what exactly happened with Jason. It seems most people are under the impression that Jason never actually drowned in the lake and that he's been living in the woods ever since. This leaves you wondering how Mrs. Voorhees never found him all those years since. My assumption had always been that Jason first rose from the lake after the death of his mother, and he's been a zombie all this time. The only monkey wrench in that idea is that the Jason we saw at the end of part 1 was a young boy. In part 2, he's an adult, which in itself is debatable. He looks small to me. In further sequels, they always seem to beef him up more, so I always assumed he was still growing. The one moment where I can concede he's probably an adult in part 2 is at the end you see his face. He looks much different, especially having gone from bald to having long hair. Then you raise the question, if he's a zombie, do zombies age? If they do, his growth rate between parts 1 and 2 would make enough sense to me because they take place 5 years apart. That's enough time for a youth to grow drastically. But then everything gets confusing because he drowned back in the 50s. The first Friday the 13th takes place in the present time. He would have rotted away by then. So the only thing to explain him being a young boy in part 1 is that it was just a hallucination or a dream. But I don't like that. That's my favorite moment. I want it to be real. But then again, none of it's real because it's just a movie, so fuck it. Anyway, Friday the 13th Part 3 was the first and only of the series to be shot in 3D. This was during the 80s revival of 3D after it had first been popularized in the 50s. And now, today, 3D is commonplace again because, I don't know, for some reason 3D comes into fashion once every 30 years. Who knows why. It was also part of the cliche of having Part 3 be in 3D, like Jaws 3D and Amityville 3D. I do have to say it lives up to what it advertises, with things always coming at the screen. Nowadays, movies are always 3D even when they have no purpose to be. Some commend the 3D of some modern movies of not being gimmicky and enhancing the story more or whatever, but it's 3D. It's a fucking gimmick. Throw shit at the screen. That's the whole point. The problem is that today you can't see this movie in 3D, so now all you have is a bunch of idiots flinging yo-yos at the camera for no reason. Sure, the Blu-ray set includes the 3D version, but it's the red and blue type. The glasses are included, which is cool that they made it to look like Jason's hockey mask, but I tried it out and everything still looks like double to me. I haven't been able to see anything look like it's popping off the screen at all. This is a movie that demands a proper 3D release on an actual 3D disc made for 3D televisions. Three-dimensional or not, the characters are just as two-dimensional as you'd expect. You have a bunch of stoners out on vacation, a biker gang who gives them a lot of trouble, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Jason Voorhees hacking them up. You have a prankster who takes it as far as possible, always playing a morbid joke in every other scene. You know, if this same movie was made today, is there any chance that this guy wouldn't be played by Seth Rogen? This guy happens to be the one who accidentally gives Jason the idea of the hockey mask, something that really catches on. This shot right here is the first time you see Jason with the hockey mask on. Movie history is made. So for those who want to see the Jason that everybody expects, this is the first movie that has that. Look at him run! There he goes again! Also, this one has greater production quality yet. Once again, the budget was doubled. This time it was about $2.5